Hey everyone, in this episode we're talking with Aaron Osman from New Zealand. I always love getting these international voices, these variety of accents on the podcast. And he definitely came through for us. Aaron actually has some experience working in the leadership development world. And so I wanted to get him on the podcast and just see what he could share from his time as a branch president in New Zealand and just in his, professional research and things that he does there. And we talk about expectations we have on ourselves as leaders. Sometimes we can put too many daunting expectations on us. We unpack that concept, and he gives us some perspectives, some phrases like everything will work out, like turning our will over to God, thy will be done type of approach to leadership, and surrendering many of these expectations to God, so we don't reach this point of overwhelm. And it's fun to be a leader, but to be an overwhelmed leader, come on, nobody wants that. So definitely jump into this episode. May need to listen to it a couple times because there's some bangers here. So here's my interview with Aaron Osman from New Zealand. All right, today I'm connecting with Aaron Osman. How are you, Aaron?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to have more of a non-American accent here on the Leading Saints podcast. You're from Australia, is that right?
New Zealand.
Oh my, I did it. Oh man, I
would cut
that out, but I gotta repent of my sins, Aaron. That's right. It's New Zealand.
It's New Zealand.
Oh boy, yeah. And there's a little bit of a competition, or a little bit of a tension at times between the Aussies and the Kiwis. Is that right?
That's right, and
nice.
The only way I can liken it is the Canadians and Americans, right? So
that's right. Which come on, that's an easy decision. And what part of New Zealand do you live in?
So I live in near a city called Tauranga, which is in the region called the Bay of Plenty, and that's just coastline, beautiful beaches, and beautiful mountains behind us, and it's just a gorgeous place to live.
Awesome. And born and raised there?
No, I was born and raised in a place called Porirua in the Wellington region, in the capital city, and only just recently moved to our current location in the last 8 years.
Oh, great. And then, so what's a temple trip look like for you?
Yeah, so the temple closest to us will be an hour and a half away. And then when Auckland is dedicated, that's about 2 hours-ish away from us. So,
nice. And what stage of building is that at right now? It's hard to keep track of all these temples.
Yeah, I think it's getting close to an open house.
Okay.
Yeah, temple president and matron have been called. Recorder, I think, has been sorted. So I think those are the indicators that we're close to an open house, but no dates.
Awesome. Now, you've the person who connected us, a mutual friend of ours, David Casperson, a good shout out to him, who's in the leadership space, but you're connected in the leadership world as well. How do you describe the career that you're in?
Yeah. So for me, my role in the organization that I'm with is to help develop leaders of all kinds, extend their capacity, so the ability to think about the situations that they're in and help them make good decisions on how they're going to move their challenges forward or apply a specific skill within their reality. So it's content contextual, but also adding the human element of storytelling in that space. So that way, we're not just focused on the technical aspects of leadership, but the real human aspects of it, the weight, the challenges, the funnies, the humor of it, all of everything that encompasses leadership. So in essence, my job is to help people think differently and deeply about what they're doing so they can choose different and experience different. That's how I describe the role that I play in there.
Well, hopefully you'll do a little bit of that for us generally through this podcast today. So
hopefully
we'll see how it goes. Hopefully. So, and I love talking with guys like you. But the difficult thing is there's like 100 directions that we can go in, right? And you could
Yeah.
probably speak eloquently to so many different topics about leadership development. So I kind of came to you, as I do with others, with the question of, let's say you were walking into a room full of church leaders, bishops, relief society presidents, stake presidents, whatever it is, and you want to present to them on a handful of specific topics. What would it be? And where'd your mind go with all that, or was it? Did you have to decide between a few things, or how'd it go?
Yeah, my gut feeling was really based on my own experiences serving as a branch president and the lessons that I learned through that, as much as well as connecting to life in general. There were three major lessons that I learned that I feel are quite relevant and thought provoking for all types of leaders. That doesn't interfere with priesthood keys or um, you know their particular role in the units that they serve in, because I mean, what advice could I give for their particular situations? I went to think about those three things that I learned and started from there, and just kind of noted some other key points that I thought might be relevant and helpful for our listeners. So that's kind of where I went, just looked back at what I learned and thought there's a lot of story I could potentially share in that space, as much as principles or lessons that might be helpful.
Yeah. So in your outline, you talk about this concept of expectations, and we all feel that, right? When we're called to a position as a branch president, as a bishop, or relief society president, whatever it is, we want to do a good job, right? We want to step up and answer the call and bring ideas to the table and get some revelation flowing and really have a good job. And so we naturally set expectations for us, for others. Where do we begin to understand the expectation dynamics that are happening for a new leader?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of kind of factors at play. So there's tradition. So we see previous leaders and how they've grown and responded and served, and I think that plays a role in how we're expected to lead as well. Second is our own. I would say yes, expectations, but inadequacies also have a part that influence what we are expected to achieve or become or deliver. And the third one for me is goes to obviously responsibility. So when you look at the handbook, we've got more responsibilities than we have time for, and the detail in those chapters we get into, section 3.1.1.1.1. Like, I mean, there's so much detail, right?
Yeah.
We're into like three different dots into the future, and I think that particular part also plays a role in how we craft expectations. And so when I first started in what I call the honeymoon phase, you're excited, you've got that new energy, like pretty much any calling, and you're getting in there and you're doing a lot of work and you're trying to establish yourself. But pretty soon you feel the weight of the responsibility upon your shoulders, because it's the people part that really starts to play into your psyche, meaning you start to think about every individual that's in your unit, whether it's 10 people or 200 people. Everybody is important. And as you become aware of every individual's needs or family's needs, then I think the combination of what I've described starts to click in. And then it becomes even heavier, because you're creating a certain expectation that wasn't really there as part of your calling or setting apart. And I think that's the part where people got to wrestle with it in the early stages of their calling, until it finally clicks and they're like, oh, actually, I don't have to be that. I'm supposed to just do this one or two things that the Lord expects me to do, not the 8 or 9 things that I've created for myself to do. Yeah. So some of it is kind of experience, right? You just have to learn through the hard way what matters most versus trying to do everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So what advice would you give to a new leader who's sort of wrestling with that, or, they have that energy, and naturally that energy leads to developing more and more expectations that, oh, there's going to be like never before. Right. And like, how do we start to step back and do that so that we approach it in a realistic way?
Mm. Yeah, it's a great question, and I definitely wouldn't want to, damper anybody's enthusiasm, right? So I would say you just get in there and figure out your limits. So I think we're all going to go push too hard until we realize, oh, that's too far, I can't do that, and then rein it back. To me, I won't say that's advice, but could be a natural way that a lot of people work. That's the way I do it. Like I don't know my limits until you reach them and you're exhausted, right? But in terms of learned lessons that might be helpful, is to really go back to what matters most, and that's the plan of salvation, and Christ is the center of it. So the question I would be asking is, what role or what activities matter most in either keeping covenants, bringing people closer to Christ, or making sure I have added quality time with my family. And those three things there, I think, they are the things that matter most, right? It's going to meetings, as important and as much as we love our meetings, not essential to be exalted, in my opinion, in terms of the day-to-day running. Going to all the youth activities, I think they can survive without you being there, a few times a year. Those types of things. So yes, they're important in terms of the governance and the functioning of a church unit. But when it comes to the big rocks, the things that matter, if you're sacrificing your family and creating dysfunction to serve other people, that makes zero sense to me. And that's something I know the brethren have talked about before. So that's the thing, is I would be saying that is that with all that energy, I wouldn't put it invested into activities. I'll be investing into how we're going to move people to strengthen their relationship with Christ, make and keep covenants and ordinances, and then making sure that I have allocated time for my family, that they're safe, their well-being is secure, and that I'm present for those family activities that matter most. Because I think, again, that role modeling of that should also influence, say, behaviours in a ward when they look at the bishop or the branch president or whoever as the example, right? So if he puts his family first and still is doing his calling, then I think that would influence other people to put their family in the right order and do what matters most in their calling versus all the non-essentials.
Yeah. And from my experience, these type of things really sneak up on you. Like, because I think most leaders, I mean, generally speaking, they try to start from this place of like, we want to bring people to Christ, make sure that they're working towards their next covenant or whatever it is, and we start there, but then it sort of grows and it sneaks up on you where you're like, and that's why we should do this activity on Wednesday night. In fact, we should do it every Wednesday night. It's going to be great. We're going to have all these people there, and then it sort of becomes its own monster, and then the expectation just sneakily shifts to the activity of like, well, this has got to go well because this is sort of defining my leadership, and I've got to make this happen. And then it doesn't go well, and then you're frustrated. And you're like, wait a minute, like, remember, like back at the beginning, you were wanting to focus on bringing people to Christ, and maybe that activity is just not a good way to do it because it didn't work, right? But don't like define your leadership by how those things, sort of those auxiliary things, went.
Yeah, it's a real wrestle. Like I certainly can't deny it that you can stay up late at night thinking about those activities or thinking about those meetings and what they mean. But again, like it's something that you learn is where are you investing the energy? And so is it worth investing it in thinking about this activity's got to go well, or is it about the people that's in there? So, and that's what I kind of had to focus on as a branch president. It's not that we didn't have the means to have activities. It's just, for me personally, I had no capacity to continually drive or even delegate the activity, design and implementation to the branch. I had to think carefully, how can I justify someone leaving their family to go and do this. Like, and if I couldn't, I wouldn't do it. And the other thing too is when I looked at my own unit is if we get together every Wednesday, is that going to bring us closer together or is it going to annoy us? Is it going to take us away from other things that we could be doing and kind of lose the moment? Now, I'm not too sure what it's like around the world, but I mean, here in our country, what I've observed is that we work really well in sprints. So if we're planning to do activities in a unit that's expected to last 6 months or ongoing, that's never going to happen. But people get excited for 1 or 2 or 3 things, and then that's it. Right. And so the kind of sprint or cycle work can be helpful, temporary stuff, initiatives, but if, it's just trying to play smart in terms of how you're using your resources, right? And I think that's the thing. But again, it's just focusing on, is it the activity that's important or is it the people that's important? And I think if you're focusing on the people, the activity part will either take care of itself or it won't matter in terms of the things you worry about.
I really like that idea of sprints. Because so often we want to do things in like a yearly time frame, right? Like, this year we're going to focus on, we're doing Come Follow Me, Book of Mormon. We're going to have like a Book of Mormon Bishop Challenge, or all the youth or adults that we're going to read the Book of Mormon, right? And it's sort of this long, heavy, large thing. Or I've heard some stakes do like, we're going to index enough names that are in a typical stake, right? And I've been in buildings where they sort of have this display of like all the names they've indexed and the thermometer, of how far we've gone. And it can sometimes be this big, heavy thing. But the sprint thing of like, this month we're going to do this thing, and it's like doable, and we may get to the end and be like, all right, that was just more distracting, or I felt more burdened that month than I wanted to. And, you can regroup and then try something else. So I like the idea of sprints.
Yeah. It's just, I think we all work better that way, especially when it's not our full-time job membership wise. So the idea of trying to keep things going all year long, it's just too difficult, unrealistic. However, when you look at the strategy or the goals that an area presidency might issue out, or a stake, those are things to aim for that I think those sprint pieces can still align with, right? So it's just it's just thinking about how people respond, and I think that's an easy way to do it, and it just takes the burden of trying to hold that responsibility all year long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really helpful. So going back to like expectations of being a good leader, and when when those are skewed by our own expectations or demands or responsibilities, anything else we haven't discussed in there that we need to make sure we cover?
I suppose for me, when I think back in my experience, so when I was called in 2019, that was the exciting part. But instantly, I look back at my journal, and it was not that far in where I was like, man, this is really hard. I'm pretty much ready to move on now. I got the idea. I think I've done my part. The interesting thing was that every time I would go to work, I'd walk past the university, and I'd see, and I had this like attraction to the university. And I'm like, man, there's something about this space. I kept doing it day after day, and then later on, I kind of felt like there's this impression to go back to school and go to uni. And so, cut the dialogue out to the decision. Decided to go back to university, and so I had university, branch president, supporting my family and working full time. And then it was 2020. Then it's COVID. And so,
wow.
So, I mean, during those times, there were lots of moments where I was like, what are you doing? Like, this is my prayer. I don't understand why I have to go through all this stuff and do all these things. And what gives this particular statement relevance is that when I started university, I like to consider myself someone who goes all in when they make a commitment. So for me, all in means, A student, A plus, blah, blah, blah. So I'm aiming for that kind of thing. The first year was very difficult to sustain. Second year, I had to lower my expectation and go, okay, maybe like a B plus. I'll just aim for that. By the third year, I'm like, I'm so exhausted serving, doing everything. Was, you know what, as long as I just handed my assignments, that would be success for me. Not that I'm not giving max effort, it's just the capacity to do those things were basically so small that it was unrealistic for me to expect myself to push to an A plus kind of standard when my time frames were so small, because I had other commitments to fulfill that were important. And then when I was reflecting back, I realized that the A plus kind of mentality was my own creation, that the impression or the revelation to go back to school, it had nothing to do with grades. There was no instruction about getting grades. It was go back to school and get an education. That was it. And so what I had done, it was created from my own paradigms that going back to school means I had to achieve a certain thing. So what made that a light bulb moment for me is that I had to transfer that to a branch president, transfer that to a husband and father, transfer that to an employee, which was, out of all of these responsibilities, how much of this am I creating myself, these expectations of being a great leader, or what does that even mean in terms of my role as a branch president, which was essentially, when I'm interacting with people, do they feel welcomed? Do they feel wanted? When I'm having my one-on-ones with them or speaking at the pulpit, am I in a position where I'm paying attention to their needs? And so when I'm talking to them, I can give, inspired counsel or help them to feel a deeper connection to Jesus Christ. So there were some key things that the Lord taught me. That's what I want you to focus on. Everything outside of that is not for you. You either delegate it or don't do it. And the church will be fine. It will not fall apart if you're not doing all the other stuff in the handbook, just as long as you do these bits. And the same with being a husband and father. That for me was striving to be, present at home certain times of the night, right? So between this time and this time, I'll just sit and be with the family, or I'm making dinner for them, doing the housework, like just trying to do things that would be helpful, of some value, making sure I'm available to, watch my daughter perform, that kind of thing. So yeah, it was a real eye-opening moment and reflection to look back and go in my journals and go, how much of the pressure do I feel is my own creation versus what was the actual instructions that the Lord gave me to do. And the last thing I'll say on that is that the reality or the real wrestle with it is that it takes a lot to give up those expectations, because you feel like if I don't do them, then these catastrophic things will happen, or I'm not good, or I'm a terrible leader, or you have that kind of emotional mental wrestle.
Or it feels like God literally said, "These are your expectations." At times, right? We misread that. It's like, well, God gave me this expectation. I can't just get rid of it, right?
Yeah. And so that's part of the wrestle, but I think that's also part of our ability to grow and trust in the Lord.
Yeah.
Is that you trust him enough to go, if I just do these one or two, three things, he will make up the rest. And that was quite an experience for me personally to let go of and give it to him.
Mm-hmm.
But
man,
hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot that you said there. First of all, I just appreciate, as somebody who graduated college with nothing but C's, at least I felt that way. I appreciate that because because many times I really got to manage the expectations or check your expectations and really determine where they come from. Because a lot of time we're all born with an ego for various reasons, and that ego sometimes gets a little out of control, and then the expectations fueled by the ego. And I love how you said, maybe in different words, but just this, what were you called to do? you were called as a branch president. Nobody ever came to you and said, "Hey, we'd actually want you to completely disrupt and transform the nature of this branch." And so, if you could do that within your time, But as leaders, and believe me, I empathize with the leader who maybe listens to leading saints, here's all these ideas, they're just like loving it, and they want to get in there and they want to make a difference. And but nobody ever asked you to do that per se. And so there's those days where, and you're gauging this by the overwhelm that you feel, right? You go, man, I'm 6 months into this and I've never been so tired, and like I'm dreading Sunday, right? Like I don't know if I can step back in that building, right? Then it's like, okay, red flag, like maybe you're off track as far as misunderstanding the expectations that you had in the first place. And maybe, oftentimes as a reframe though, it's a lot of doing less of like you said, maybe I'm just gonna turn in my assignment, or, I'm just gonna make sure I show up on Sunday, that we have the general meetings we're supposed to have, the doors get unlocked, the lights get turned on, that the sacrament's available, and that's it. I don't need to figure out how to get 16-year-old Billy in the ward hanging out with the good kids. I mean, hopefully all these things happen, but to just sort of release yourself from those expectations that often the ego just puts on your shoulders, because you want to be that innovative, dynamic leader that they build the statue out front. But guess what? They never build statues of leaders in front of church buildings, so you don't have to worry about that.
No, I don't have to worry about that at all. No, but I think it's a really insightful point, right? So what I'm referring to is our own inner wrestle as leaders, right, versus managing or directing, leading the unit. And so of course you've got presidents and leaders and assistants and councilors and all of that to make sure the work happens. But the things that keep you up at night that no one sees, the moments that you're awake at 3 a.m, worried and thinking about and this person or that, or doing this thing. Sometimes we're making it more difficult for ourselves than it needs to be. And so when you describe, as long as I turn up on Sunday and the doors open, the lights are on, and the sacraments pass, so that was my last year of service. That was it. Was that I had capacity enough to turn up on Sunday and make sure that the ordinances of the sacrament were performed, that every person that turned up I greeted and connected with, and that if I had an interview, like temple recommend or go visit someone, that I can do that. I can do those things. And what I found was that those interactions, I think, progressed our branch more effectively than trying to do so many things at a subpar level, right? So I was really taken back by Elder Osman, who came to Hamilton a few years ago. And he made it his mission to greet every single person that turned up to this big meeting one by one. And he said something about if that was, he thinks about greeting everybody one by one as one of the most important things he would do as a unit leader before he would take the stand, or even as an apostle if it's reasonable for him to do so. And something about that really resonated with me as something I can do, regardless of my energy levels or capacity, is that I can go around and extend my hand to someone and make them feel welcomed.
Yeah.
And we just don't know the impact of that. So small and simple things, that's our scripture, right? By small and simple things, great things are brought to pass. So try not to lose ourselves in that.
Yeah, and I love that because it still has that innovative component to it, right? That that is different. It feels different. It can sort of disrupt maybe a negative culture, or people think, "Wow!" I remember this, as a bishop, just the way our building was designed. Everybody the parking lot was in the back of the building. And so I most weeks made sure that I was at the back of the building at that main door, shaking hands as people left and just, giving my farewell or whatever. And I remember this one instance where an individual called me, this sweet old lady in the ward, and just articulated just how much that meant to her, that I was always there, and she always saw her bishop, right? And again, that wasn't this big, hefty new program or a new way to do ministering, but it was just these little components that are disruptive, they're innovative, but they're not heavy. They're just these small and simple things, like you mentioned, right?
That's it. I learned towards the end of my service to ask myself the question: how can I extend the blessings of Jesus Christ to the person I'm interacting with? And so that's the question I would pose. And sometimes it's just a handshake. Like, there's no magical or spiritual moment per se. It's just run of the mill banter, have a bit of fun, socialize. But we have no idea the impact of that on the individual. And sometimes that's what they need when they're, when they're going through something, or they might be a faithful member that just doesn't get a lot of interaction with people because they're so busy. Everyone's scattering off everywhere, trying to do their callings. But I think that's the thing that also helps with the ministering aspect, is that if I'm looking at every individual or whoever I'm interacting with and thinking, how can I extend the blessings of Christ to them? And it's not deep and philosophical. It's just shaking their hand, saying hello, how are you? Getting to know them, having a bit of a laugh with them is just as spiritual in my mind as having a deep, meaningful conversation about things that they're going through. Yeah. And I think that mentality then shifts the way we do things in our ministry. I think that's the part we talked about earlier, right? Do I focus on the activity or do I focus on the people? And a little bit, an extra layer that is that when I'm focusing on people and thinking about how can I extend that blessing to them, whatever they need, then we organically will do what's right for that moment, even in the administrative things.
Yeah, that's powerful. This principle you put on your notes for us, it always works out. Like, I remember this instance, being a bishop, and there's such this pressure at times to meet regularly with your ward council, right? And you're like, all right, maybe we'll meet every other week. We'll make sure we're just like getting ahead of all the problems or all the topics, the issues that are coming up. And I remember, for whatever reason, holidays and different stake conferences or whatever, we didn't have like a ward council for like over a month. And I remember this feeling of like the stress set in, like, oh no, like it's all gonna fall apart, And then a few weeks later, I sort of had this epiphany, probably from God. And I was like, like nobody missed a beat. Like, the primary ran as it should. The young men, young women, they just did their activities. Like, everything just worked, right? Yeah. And sometimes we put a lot of expectation in these things we do, which are important and need to be done. But I love this mantra of it'll always work out, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, that's a President Hinckley thing. That was one of his.
That's true, huh?
Common messages, right? Is that it all works out. And what I experienced at the branch level that we had to learn pretty quickly is that a lot of times our speakers could be away or they could be sick. We only had under about 20 to 23 people, and so we speak quite regularly as a branch, but sometimes there wouldn't be anyone available. And my councilor and I will look at each other and it's like, man, what are we going to do? This was, the first time this had happened, we'll start to panic, and I'll be like, man, I don't know what to do. Like, yeah, I can get up and speak, but that's going to, bore people pretty quickly if I'm doing it every time. Especially if it's desperation, not inspiration, that's not going to work. And sure enough, 2 missionaries turn up. You're like, great, we'll ask the missionaries to speak. Or a family visiting from Utah turns up, or a family visiting from another city turns up, and we invite them to speak. What we had encountered over about 2 or 3 times is that every time we didn't have someone to speak, the Lord would always provide someone. And we started to learn to get comfortable with that it always would work out for our sacrament meetings. And so we never panicked after about the third time. We just sat there and relaxed, and then sure enough, someone would turn up, and they'll be our speakers, or we'll be instructed to do something, And I think those experiences is that it's the Lord again teaching us to rely on Him, not our own judgment, not our own wisdom of how things should run. And I think that's aligned in the Book of Mormon, right? They ran meetings as inspired by the Holy Ghost, and we have our structure and format, but in between the major points of the sequence, we can give space for the Spirit to then direct what needs to happen, so then our saints are nourished when they come to sacrament meeting. But that was just one of many. Our family had lots of that too, and school, all sorts of things. Things just work out.
Yep, I love that, and it's such a statement of faith, and I mean that's the message of the gospel is that all expectations were fulfilled through the Savior Jesus Christ. So therefore, it's going to work out. It'll be fine. No death or sickness or tragedy and mortality can ever lead to something, lead to it not working out. It will work out. And that's the hope-filled message of the gospel. So, and then there's the sort of the cousin statement to that statement, which is thy will be done. Tell me about that.
Will be done. Okay. Yeah. So I guess through the years 2 to even 5, so even at the end of my time as a branch president, it was a very heavy period of lots of challenges in every responsibility that I had. That the weight was pretty heavy, and part of that again is what we've already spoken about, but also it was the natural response of carrying those responsibilities. Like we've gone through at the branch level, we had 2 deaths, we had there was like family dynamics, there were COVID, there was interpersonal relationship conflict. There was lots of stuff going on right in our branch that we had to navigate through, and those things were weighing on my mind. There's the demands of school. During work, I had some really tough work challenges, had to change like jobs, like job roles within the company because one got disestablished. There's all the politics of working and navigating around a corporate environment. There's lots of things that are happening in our family. There's supporting my wife, who was also studying at university as well, and my children were going through their things and we were going through our things as family. So emotionally and mentally it was heavy all the time, every day, and I barely could sleep well. I couldn't sleep well, and always constantly thinking, never relaxed. So that was for years. This was going on, and journaling, changing, pivoting, doing all sorts of things to make sure that I could be present and effective as much as possible helped. So setting that scene in that context, a lot of my prayer, I think you could understand was, this is hard. This is really hard for me. Like, I'm drained. I'm emotionally spent. I don't know if I can keep doing this, And so that was the language for a lot of my prayer. But then nothing would really change. So it was almost like that. Kids tell you something, you're like, yeah, cool story, man. Like, cool, go do the dishes anyway. Yeah. It's kind of like one of those things. Like, I understand that you stubbed your toe, but you can still stand and do the dishes. And so, I felt like that was kind of the thing, was there was no response until I had learned that one pivotal sentence, which was, this is how I'm feeling. Nevertheless, if you want me to keep going, I will keep going. Not my will, because my will is release me. My will is, why did you send me to university? I didn't ask for that. My will is make life easy for me. That's my will. But your will obviously is something different. And so that started to shape and shift, where the prayer going, this is how I feel. This is how I really feel about things. But nevertheless, if you need me to keep going, then all I asked for was the strength and the wisdom to keep going. That was it. And so that was the prayer almost every day, and especially at year 4, year 5, when I was completely exhausted and before I was released, I said, I can't really do much but turn up on Sunday. Yeah. But if that's what you need me to do, I'll keep going, no matter what. And I think that moment there, or that type of language, that type of state that we can get to, then allows the Lord to really show forth not only his power, but then teach us the most meaningful lessons that we are required to learn for that period of time. So had I not learned to rely on his will, therefore have access to his power, then I'd probably still be serving now because I wouldn't have learned that lesson. Man, you're a slow learner. You can serve for another year. That's probably what it was, right? So I think that it reminds me very quickly about the scripture in Ether, is that I give unto men weakness that they may be humble. And when we look at weakness in the verses above that, Moroni does not refer to weakness as sin per se, or anything that separates us from God. He refers to the fact that they're powerful speakers, but the Lord didn't make them writing and mighty because of the awkwardness of their hands. And he's fearful that they would be mocked by the Gentiles. It's a capability thing that he was referring to in that segment. And for me, it was a capability as much as it was a capacity issue. Yeah. Right? So I was given those weaknesses to learn to be humble. So then when you exercise faith in him, he would make those weaknesses become strengths. That's what I had to learn. And so thy will be done is part of the language of really heartfelt prayer that removes all of my own wisdom and ability to block out his influence, because I have no capacity, no energy to do all that, no energy to reason, no energy to deliberate, no energy for being learned, relying on my own wisdom, too tired. It's just, I have enough energy to do what you need me to do, and I'll go do that. Yeah. So, yeah. So that's, I think that's how I would have experienced or described that thy will be done piece, is that faith in him and trust in him, but also it's now you're real about who you are. Now you're real about where things are at, and now open to be molded and shaped and taught by him.
Yeah. I mean, what I love about that statement, obviously, referencing when the Savior said it, it's such a statement of surrender, right? And surrender, the paradox of surrender is that it's so empowering, right? You will feel strength when you turn your will over to God and say, let's do this your way, right? And this is one thing I'm constantly sort of processing and reminding myself of, as it seems like there's always more to do at the end of the day and not enough time at the end of the day. Yeah. The next day sort of hanging over me, like, okay, I got to get up and really get after it. I got my checklist. I got these things I got to get done. And to just sort of center and ground my mind with a statement of like, well, what if I literally gave the whole day to God? And what I mean by that is not that I just go to my the closet and shut the door and read the scriptures all day, but like, what if I just said, no, let's just do this your way. We're going to start with prioritizing you. So yeah, I'm going to do a little scripture study. It's not going to be rushed because I have nothing to rush to if this is your will, right? Like he will always show up and give us the strength and the needs and even to those people that we feel like we have to show up for as leaders, right? Like he'll take care of the ward, he'll take care of the branch, the people, the sick widow, that right. And sure, maybe that part of that day is like, no, you actually got to go over to their house. You got to sit with them. You got to visit them, right? That may be part of it. But I just love that phrase, which is, I mean, it sounds so elementary of like, well, of course, thy will be done. But so often we just skip over that, and we're like,
Yeah,
at least this, and I can only speak from my experience. Like I just lead out with my will. Listen,
yeah.
that's a great scripture and everything, but I got to get stuff done, right? So I
It's
think it's
a,
such a grounding, centering um, thought to dwell on.
absolutely. Surrendering is a great word, uh, because then it's not about you now.
Yeah.
I think that's why things get so heavy as leaders. In one context, is that you've got to get enough weight on you to realize that you're way in over your head. You can't do it. But the what keeps us there is the fact that we haven't figured it out yet, or haven't acknowledged that, or got rid of enough of our own, say, ego, or enough of our own uh, limitations, that we haven't surrendered everything yet to God. And once we get there, I think we have far more capacity to do good, and we start to see things in a very different way.
It takes my mind to a conversation I had recently just online. I'll hear from various people from around the world, leaders, and I always appreciate sort of just hearing their experience, what's happening in their world and their leadership calling. And this individual was really struggling. And this is really a main issue that a lot of leaders face, is that I want to do a good job. I have this expectation, but if I didn't have to deal with all these people who have their own expectations and their own, desires and agency and all these things, and she was really wrestling with this feeling of like they're not doing what I expect them to do. I'm not going to hit these goals and expectations that I have, and it just sort of was reaching the point of overwhelm for her. And as I went back and forth, I sort of went to, encouraged her with these statements of just like surrender it, realize, that you don't have to do all these things. And there's a statement where she said something like, well, I don't get it. Like, isn't it supposed to be hard? I'm like, oh, that's interesting that you think that. Uh, because you think about being a missionary, like, that was a hard 2 years, right? And was it always hard? No, but we kind of look at that like, oh, it should be hard. Like the work of the Lord is hard. Um, and many times I don't know. I almost was dumbfounded. Like, I don't know how to respond to that. Like, I don't think it's supposed to be hard. I think it's supposed to be nourishing, sanctifying and energizing, that you're in the work of the Lord, that you're helping people, you're turning people towards Christ. And that's sort of just that general indicator of overwhelm, where you're like, I think something's missing, right? Like that expectation is out of whack. And anyway, so that's where surrender comes in and can really be a strong tool. So it's awesome.
Of course.
Any other thoughts, points, principles, Aaron, that
Mm.
we make sure we cover, or do we do a good job? I think this was a great discussion.
Uh, I guess the only thing that comes to mind in terms of that interaction with other people and expectations of others, on projected to you and also on your congregation. The first one is, always relied on the principle or the doctrine of agency. Yeah. And with agency, there are natural consequences and spiritual consequences of decisions that people make that are out of my hands. So what I mean by that, or how that's helped, is that sometimes I would, in the early stage, take on the frustration of someone else's decision not to turn up to church or not to do their assignment or whatever it is, when that was their choice to do that for whatever reason. The reason doesn't matter, but they chose to do that. So therefore, their choice will give them a consequence, and consequence is neutral in this context. So then, when I start to think about that as a guiding principle, to me, it's like, it doesn't matter per se whether they do it or don't do it. It's, in terms of my reaction to that, because that's their choice to do that, as much as it's my choice to turn up to the meeting or not turn up to the meeting, or to visit or not visit, whatever. And how that's been helpful is that I'm not trying to coerce or get upset to make someone do their calling for whatever benefit I think they should receive. It's the fact that they are where they are in their spiritual journey, and they are making those choices because that's what they are choosing to do. So my response, rather than reaction, is that, sweet, that's your choice. If you don't want to turn up to church, I don't need to get upset about that, or I don't need to feel guilty that you're not there, because that's your decision to turn up. My decision is how I'm going to respond to that, which could be go visit, could be send you a message, it could be do nothing, because sometimes patience is a really good response as well. And something in there for our listeners that they will, again, these are lessons that only the Lord can teach in his own curriculum, in his own way. I think is really helpful in removing the outward projection of expectation to others. So then when you see people where they are, then you can lift them to where they need to be by not forcing them to make decisions or whatever. It's by helping them to make good decisions when you're interacting with them and letting them choose for themselves. And then in terms of projection towards you is something that, I had those restless nights about, is the more I could turn my attention to what does God want me to do? So what is the thing that he needs me to do for this period of time? And I'm working hard within my capacity to do that, then I'm on the right track, meaning it's his church, it's his unit. I'm his messenger, or I'm his servant. So I'm interested in what he wants me to do and how I'm showing up as a leader for him, rather than worrying about, am I being a good leader for everybody else? So I think there's a mindset shift that people can play with in that regard, is to focus your efforts on serving him. And then that way it takes away the need to be everybody or everything for everybody, because it's almost impossible to do that, to fulfill everybody's needs and wishes. So again, sometimes that comes with the wrestle to let go of certain things that you have or hold on to. But when people step back and zoom out, they can see that makes complete sense, that I'm more interested in what God needs me to do. Like, you look through the scriptures, it's the same thing. Prophets are interested in what God wants them to do and not too interested in how people react.
Yeah, I love that. And one we'll put a link to it in the show notes, but sort of a related episode we did in the past, I recorded with Jody Moore. It's called Expectation Pain. And that's because I think we've talked about expectations we often have in ourselves as leaders. That's all that we cover in depth, as far as like when we have expectations in others and they don't come through. Like we see our bishop and it's like, well, that's not how I was a bishop and he should do it differently. I have different expectations in him, right? And that can lead to a lot of frustration. So we'll link to that as well, for sure. Well, last question I have for you, Aaron, as you reflect on your time as a leader in the church, how has being a leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
How it's helped me to be a better follower of Jesus Christ it has deepened my relationship with him, and knowing that I can rely on him for guidance that he always provides, means for me to accomplish his work, but that he has a very deep, unexplainable love for me, but also for each of his children. And I have witnessed that as one who got to serve in that capacity, of how individually keen he is aware. But for me, I've seen his miracles in our family that makes me know that his love is individualized. So therefore, my love for him has deepened through the experience of being refined and stretched and molded by his grace and his mercy and love. So leading for him it just means that it's just helped me to make him first, to make him an integral part of my life, so I can be successful in what I do.